Hello and welcome to the CUFI UK podcast for Zion's sake. My name is Alastair, this is Alex.
Hello.
And in today's podcast, we share our experiences when CUFI joined over 30,000 people in Hyde Park to remember October the 7th.
That's right, we're also going to be looking at things that don't make sense. One of them being the comments made by Archbishop Justin Welby and some other things as well.
That's right, keep listening because it will all make sense. So on Sunday, we were honoured to participate as CUFI in the October 7th memorial held in Hyde Park in London.
Yeah.
There were around 30,000 people that attended. CUFI were privileged to be part of that. We were standing shoulder to shoulder with the Jewish community in remembering the victims of October the 7th, 1,200 people that were murdered by Hamas. Of course, also remembering the hostages that were taken captive and over 100 who remain captive in Gaza. And it was an important occasion because among the many Jewish people that were there at the memorial, there were many Christians as well. We certainly felt that it was important to attend and to stand shoulder to shoulder, really to send a message among the thousands that they are not alone. The Jewish people are not alone. Israel is not alone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the message we had, wasn't it, on the stand? Christians United for Israel stands with the
because we
Jewish
had
community.
a stand on the parameter of the event, and we actually had the opportunity to meet so many from the Jewish community, and we were encouraged actually because I think there were many among the Jewish community that had heard about CUFI and the work we do, many who were hearing about CUFI for the first time. So we were really encouraged to have that interaction and to be able to send that exact message that they are not alone. And we were also pleased to see many CUFI supporters, many of whom watch this podcast. And so if you were one of those that we met on Sunday, we were delighted to be able to meet you. And yes, it was an important occasion. And we heard from speakers, we heard from the chief rabbi, we heard from the Israeli ambassador, we also heard from one of the IDF soldiers who was one of the first soldiers to arrive at the kibbutz on October the 7th. We heard his testimony. We also heard from the mother of the last remaining female British hostage in Gaza. And these are reminders that we need to continually keep in our thoughts and our minds and our prayers, because it just reiterates and hits home the very reason why we do what we do, and the need for it, the need to stand with the Jewish community, the need to speak out against anti-Semitism, the need to continue to keep Israel in our prayers, because whilst October the 7th was a truly tragic day and will go down as a tragic day in history, a stain on history, and an awful day that the Jewish people will always remember. The challenges were not limited to October the 7th. They have continued, and they continue with Hamas's and Hezbollah's and the Houthis and the Iranian regimes continued aims to want to wipe out the Jewish people from the land of Israel. And as someone reminded me, actually at the table when I said these things, it was a Jewish gentleman. He said they don't just want to wipe out the Jewish people from the land of Israel. They want to wipe out the Jewish people from the face of the earth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think we got two different perspectives from the event, because obviously you were on the table. We had a small team there on the table who were handing out free leaflets and magazines, things like that, and also just interacting with hundreds, if not thousands, of people. Whereas my experience, I was stood in the press box with, next to the BBC, the Telegraph, all the rest of it, feeling like a complete amateur compared to these seasoned sort of veterans of the media sort of thing. And actually my interactions with people were, "Oh, you're not the BBC, are you?" And
really?
it was that kind of like, trying to suss out who I was. And, I had that sort of interaction where, because I was there with a camera with, filming the event and things, I didn't really have much interaction. I did have some interaction with people, and I said, I'm from Christians United for Israel. And actually I had some people thank me as well, surprisingly as well. So, yeah, but I think it was a bit of a different thing. I was sort of like in the front, sort of in the middle of the crowd sort of feeling, and, absorbing it all in as well. I think it was just a really, I wanted the few people I spoke to know that I was there on Israel's side. And I said, well, I'm actually, I'm part of the biased media. I'm very pro-Israel. And then they would, laugh and then actually talk to me sort of thing. And, so... I think it was a really good event. One thing that really surprised me actually when I was filming, like I had a few people say, "Oh, do you know how many people are here? Can you see?" Because I was a bit more elevated and I had the camera, and the camera was like above me. So I turned the camera, and I remember just zooming and seeing just flag after flag after flag going all the way down, further than I realized. And so from the front at first I was thinking, oh, maybe there's 2,000 or 3,000 people here. When I actually did that, I was like, wow, this is really a big protest, and actually it just showed how many people were there.
Yes, and hats off to the organisers who did a fantastic job in holding this event in Hyde Park, and thankfully the event did not, from what we are aware, I mean it's different when you're behind the scenes, but from what we could see, there was no disruption from any protesters. It was carried out safely, securely. The police and the CST did a fantastic job in securing the area. So it felt a very safe occasion, and it was a big thing. I know it was a big thing. I was speaking to another Jewish gentleman who was explaining about how he was fearful about leaving the house. So there would have been some within the community where actually the thought of gathering in such a public place, especially in light of some of the things which happened on Saturday, and we'll come to that later, this is a significant thing. It's we shouldn't even be talking about this, the fact that there is a threat, for the Jewish people in this country, but it was defied, and so it was a privilege to be part of that, and well done to everyone who came alongside, CUFI supporters who were able to make it. And I would just say that happening on Sunday, and I was very keen to make this point to some in the Jewish community that I spoke to, was that also on Sunday, many Christians across the country were remembering October the 7th in their own local area, at their own churches, also within their own homes, because not everyone, of course, were able to come to London on a middle of afternoon on Sunday. But so many did set time aside. We invited CUFI supporters to set time aside. Many held something within their services. We have had feedback from many Christians that have done that in their own churches on Sunday or on another day. Read the reading that we provided on our resources page, candles that they've ordered especially for October the 7th remembrance, and I think that's a really important message as well.
I think it was a great opportunity for, we have many people who contact us saying that their church isn't pro-Israel, that kind of thing, but actually this was an opportunity to kind of have a pro-Israel message at church for some congregations that maybe aren't outwardly pro-Israel or that sort of thing, and they can put this in. But ultimately, we're thankful that many churches are pro-Israel, and they, took part in this sort of commemorations or did something of their own to commemorate it. And I think one other thing you're saying about the security aspect, I actually had some friends of mine sort of saying to me, messaging me beforehand, going, "Are you really going to that? Aren't you worried?" And one of these friends is a veteran football supporter who's sort of, not scared of a scuffle sort of thing. And he was sort of a bit, "Are you sure you're okay going there?" And I was thinking to myself, I actually felt completely safe when I was there. I didn't have any fear. Like, the police are there. And I think as well, to be honest, the pro-Palestinian groups, okay, I think there were a few people who like shouted something. We actually had a lot of Iranians there as well who were chanting, "We love Israel" and "Free Iran" and stuff like that. So yeah, they were good fun to have in the crowd. But the thing is, I do think there is like a good amount of protection from, for the Jewish community from obviously the police. But I think as well, the Palestinian groups know if they actually start trouble at these things, it won't help their cause. It will only show, what we see in the media when these protests are actually put out there is that you have one side which is very aggressive, which is constantly having, troubles, which is the Palestinian side, because, well, when you're supporting terror, you have some people, in that group that sort of aren't the best of people. Then on the flip side, you have the pro-Israel support, where there literally is no incidents, where everyone is nice and friendly, looks after each other. There's no, there's even a picture I saw of Hyde Park after a pro-Palestinian rally where it was full of litter and trash. And then looking at the ground, because we were there obviously until the very end when everyone had left, and actually there's very little litter and someone was picking it up straight away, sort of thing. It was like a different contrast between like the two different crowds and things. So,
Well, we can come on to that also, because there's something we're going to speak about, the protest which happened the day before. But before we do that, I just want to remind everyone that actually there's still an opportunity to request these bookmarks. We handed these bookmarks to remember October the 7th to hundreds, if not thousands, of people on Sunday, and we would like to make it available to everyone listening to this podcast if you would like one. Also, we have the reading that is available to download from our website, but we do have it in print form as well. We've sent this to everyone on our mailing list. We handed them out also on Sunday. These are available to request by post if you would like them in physical form. And to do that, please send us an email. The email address is info@cufi.org.uk. The email address will be in the description as well. And please let us know your address that you would like us to send it to, and we would be very happy to do that. Also, if you would like to make a donation towards the work of Christians United for Israel, we would be more than happy to send you one of these candles, October the 7th Memorial Candle. I know that the actual day has now passed, but we're certainly continuing to remember throughout this week, and it is something that we must never forget.
Yeah.
And so if you would still like one of these, there is still an opportunity to go to our website, cufi.org.uk/October7. Follow the link to make a donation to receive one of these candles, and we will put a copy of the reading and a bookmark along with it as well.
So if you do donate, you don't have to email us to ask for the bookmark and the reading, because obviously it will be included with the candle. And obviously if you're on our mailing list already, you should have received the two things already. So yeah.
And also, we've spoken about the event at the memorial event on Sunday. We have footage from that event, which we will be posting on this YouTube channel if you're listening on YouTube. So to be alerted to that, please hit the subscribe button. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe and you will receive notifications letting you know when we put new content up. So look out for that from Sunday, and we hope that you will be encouraged by seeing some of what we saw as well.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on to our next topic, let's just read some of the comments from the previous podcast, because last week's podcast was our remembrance of October the 7th, where we spent time reflecting on the tragic events of that day. And we invited you to leave your thoughts about October the 7th. And thank you for everyone that has left comments across our channels. We're just going to read a few. It's October the 7th today. I light the candle. As I smell the fragrance billowing up into the atmosphere, I send it with my prayers to Hashem, that he may prove once again, just like he proved to the pharaohs across the Red Sea, by divinely and miraculously releasing these captives in this very year of 2024, much to the jubilation of the whole of Israel and her friends worldwide. Amen. I think we could say amen to that. Catherine says, I'm in Australia, where anti-Semitism has garnered government legitimacy to our shame. I will be lighting a candle. My daughter will do the same. It is encouraging to see your support and solidarity for our beloved Jewish brothers. If a young wants to know how this story ends, just read the Book of Esther. Israel will prevail, and the wickedness of Islam will be exposed for mendacious deception it has always been. And finally, Clara says, praying for Israel. Yeah, we must.
Yeah, definitely. There's another one here. It says, when people remember that women, children and babies were murdered, we must remind everyone that this happened. The hostages need the organisations that are supposed to check on their welfare should be brought to the book. So,
very good point.
Yeah, I just want to say, because that is something, I mean, the Red Cross, for example, has not seen the hostages. They've not gone in and tried to help the hostages, and yet they were there celebrating as Palestinian prisoners were released from Israel. There's some history there as well with the Holocaust. But yeah, I think that is a good point. You know, we must always remember women and children, and the organisations who are supposed to be helping the hostages, I do think need to be held to account.
Absolutely. We appreciate all your comments. We read them all. And so please, if you have any thoughts about today's podcast, about some of the topics that we are covering, then please do leave your comments below, and we look forward to reading them.
Yep.
Okay, so Alex, moving on. We thought we would term this next section Things That Don't Make Sense.
Yep.
We're going to run through some things that don't make sense, which we have picked up on over the past few days. And one of the things that doesn't make sense are the comments by Archbishop Justin Welby.
Yep.
So I was curious to find out what has the Archbishop publicised regarding October the 7th, expecting that surely he must be putting something out there to mark October the 7th. The first thing I found was actually an interfaith statement, which was basically calling for all faiths to work together in harmony, and that was signed by the chief rabbi. It was signed by Archbishop Welby. It was signed by a Muslim leader, not specifically talking about events of October the 7th, but I thought, oh, okay, well, that's, that, for me, that's, if you want to send messages of cohesion and things like that, that's okay, but there has to be something else. There has to be something separate to that, specifically about the events of October the 7th. So I went on to X, formerly Twitter, and I have his statement here.
Right.
And this is the first thing that just doesn't make sense. He begins, and this is the only post that he made regarding the event. So surely he is going to give some thought as Archbishop of the Church of England. And do you know what, Alex? He manages to give an October the 7th memorial statement without mentioning Israel once.
Right.
Can you believe it? So, yeah. Look, can you believe it? So this is what he says. Lord, we lift before you all those who mourn today, for those held captive, for those without shelter and safety, for those enduring violence, mourning and despair. Lord, have mercy. We pray for our Jewish neighbours and our Muslim neighbours in the Holy Land, in the UK and around the world. We pray too for our Christian sisters and brothers in the Holy Land and Lebanon, asking God to strengthen and protect them. In the shadow of war, Lord, bring your comfort, healing and light to all those who dwell in darkness. And then he ends with a quote, Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 to 26, which is the scripture verse, the Lord bless you and keep you. the Lord make his face shine upon you, and be gracious to you, the Lord lift up his countenance upon you, and give you peace. Now, in itself, again, we understand the sentiment of that, but the thing that I take issue, there's a couple of things I take issue on this, okay? Firstly, this is a statement that does not mention Israel, the victim of October the 7th, at all.
Yeah.
He mentions Holy Land. Now, I like the term Holy Land, one, because the land of Israel is a holy land, okay? Also, Holy Land actually refers to the land which God gave to the Jewish people as an eternal inheritance, which actually is beyond the border of the modern state of Israel. So actually, the Holy Land, okay, that's fine. But we see time and time again, people use the term Holy Land thinking it is synonymous with Israel in order to try and avoid mentioning the word Israel. Now, that's not always the case, okay, but is clearly what has taken place here, because he says the Holy Land and Lebanon. That's the first thing that I take issue with it. And the other thing, actually, is quite interesting to see some of the comments under the post on the thread. And one of the comments is from a Twitter user who says, "Can Jews just have one day for themselves to mourn? Is that too much to ask?"
Yeah.
And I think that is spot on.
Yeah, I know. I mean, just imagine if the Archbishop put out a 9/11 statement and included Iraq and Afghanistan, the wars, and didn't even mention America or New York. You know what I'm saying?
No,
Any of my name. It's like you just wouldn't ever do that. And yet, when it comes to the Jewish people, they're allowed to completely erase their personal grievances, their personal trauma, and actually you have to lump it all together and make it a statement about everybody.
Yes.
They wouldn't do that the other way around. They wouldn't do that for Palestinians,
No.
They wouldn't do it when it comes to other countries. But this is the whole where anti-Semitism is holding Israel to a different standard than other people, and it comes out in many different ways, and I think this is one of the ways that the Archbishop is showing that. Yeah.
And he also uses the phrase "in the shadow of war." I mean, let's be mindful also that there are many Christians in Lebanon who do not support Hezbollah. We hear lots of reports of Christians in Lebanon who do not receive the aid. Hezbollah basically take the aid which is intent on ordinary Lebanon civilians. And these are just examples of the suffering that Christians experience at the hands of Israel's enemies.
Yeah, and actually Christians throughout the Middle East suffer. Christians in any Islamic nation are second-class citizens, and they are treated that way. In every country in the Middle East, Christianity is on the decline. Christians are decreasing because of persecution. When you look at the report that Open Doors does every year, the majority of nations where there is the most persecution are Islamic countries. Most persecution against Christians, I should say. Israel, on the other hand, is the only place where the Christian community is safe, where it is growing. And, it's like, from my perspective, he's the leader of the Church of England. He has millions of people who look up to him as the person, to get their spiritual guidance from. And he clearly he's clearly compromised, obviously. I mean, he's putting out statements with an imam, right? An Islamic imam who doesn't believe in the same God that we believe in. And this is part of the narrative that's coming through, that we all believe the same God, that all roads lead to heaven. Well, that is not biblical. And actually, if he's preaching that, he is an apostate leader, And so, anyway, but what I'm saying is he's unequally yoking himself with Islam to put out statements which are compromised, and then when he has his own opportunity to speak to Christians unyoked from them, he's then putting out a weaker statement than when he actually was forced to.
Well, actually, the joint statement, I mean, he mentions Hamas, he mentions Israel, and yes, the rest of the statement is not directly relating, specifically to what Israel experienced. It is trying to balance, it would seem, experiences of the Muslim community and Jewish community in light of what happened. But anyway, even despite that compromise, when it comes to himself giving a statement, he doesn't even mention Hamas, and he doesn't even mention Israel by name.
I know.
That's problematic from my point of view.
Well, definitely, because that statement you're giving there, or he gave there, is him as a Christian leader speaking to Christians who have the Bible as their source of reference. And the Bible teaches us that God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the God of Israel. And the verse he used there from Numbers is actually literally, it literally says, this is how you bless the children of Israel.
Yes.
It doesn't say this is how you bless the Muslims. This is how you bless the people of Lebanon and the Holy Land. This is the people of Israel.
Yes.
And so he's using that as like a cover-all statement. And I know, obviously, we do use that over Christians. We use it over,
of course, because it is the Holy Land.
Yeah. And also, I mean,
but it's a deliberate, that's a deliberate omission of the word Israel.
Yes, exactly. And yet he's using the text there, which tells him how to bless Israel, and he's not blessing Israel in that statement.
Yeah. It is fascinating, isn't it? How, because, cohesion and relations with our Muslim neighbours is important, and yet it amazes me how leaders in the church, like Archbishop of Canterbury, cannot see that reaching out peacefully to Muslim neighbours does not have to in any way compromise your stand with the Bible, your stand with the Jewish community, and your stand with what the Bible says concerning Israel.
Yeah.
That how that is not seen, it just baffles me.
Yeah.
It's just things that do not make sense
I know.
to me. Because actually the two should be able to be conducted without compromising your faith.
Yeah.
And this is extremely worrying, in my opinion, when it comes to this statement regarding October the 7th, because it's not just the message that Christians are receiving through this. The Jewish community, many will be looking to statements by the Archbishop of Canterbury as an indicator of where the church stands in relation to Israel and attitudes towards the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And I hope that as CUFI, bearing in mind we have support from people from all different denominations and none among the church. We're just Christians that believe the Bible and believe what God says. I really hope that the message which comes from CUFI really does counteract some of these wishy-washy statements we're getting currently from the leader of the Church of England. But it is worrying because he does represent, supposedly, the Christian climate in Great Britain and the voices of Christians. Not the voices, not our voice, not my voice, but to those who are not part of the Christian community, for those who are Jewish, people do look to what he has to say.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think as well, we need to look internally as Christians at, Christianity in Britain sort of thing. Actually, how much does this reflect what I'm saying? Like, how much actually is his point of view taken on by the majority of Christians? Actually, we know most churches are not outwardly pro-Israel. It's a hostile climate. It can be very controversial to even mention Israel in church, unless you're reading like an Old Testament passage sort of thing. And so I do wonder, actually, we probably have to, as the body of Christ, be praying about this, because this is something we have to tackle. And, if one of the most prominent people, and this goes as well with the Pope, when you look at global Christianity, there are a lot of, there's a lot of compromise in the message from the established church.
Yes.
And it is troubling, I think, for us as Christians.
So the next thing that doesn't make sense, let's move on to some things regarding the media.
Yep.
Okay, the media's coverage of the past few days, the 1 year anniversary, has been a mixed bag. I mean, there's been some very important coverage reminding us of what took place. But there does seem to be this ever-increasing attempt to try and supposedly balance the narrative to equate the suffering of the Jewish people in Israel with the suffering of those in Gaza. And let me just say, first of all, that we're not in any way diminishing the suffering that those in Gaza who are innocent of the crimes of Hamas have suffered through this conflict. It is a very serious situation that ordinary people in Gaza and ordinary people in Lebanon are experiencing as a result of this warfare, despite Israel's efforts to minimize civilian casualties and target only the terrorists. We're mindful of that. We're not downplaying that. But we see more and more the media's obsession with not being able to mention Israel as a victim, but rather seeing Israel merely as, quote, an oppressor or the perpetrator. That's problematic. We also see that the media cannot mention Israel as being the victim without somehow sowing thoughts that, it's kind of 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other. And that is really, really problematic. The other thing is that we're beginning to see a trend now, and this is the thing which doesn't make sense to me, is the fact that Gaza was beautiful. That's the trend before Israel, decided to wage war against Hamas. And there was an article on the morning of October the 7th on Sky News. I think it was the second or third article down on their list on their website. And this is the headline, quote, "Life was beautiful. What Gaza has lost in a year of war."
Yeah.
Life was beautiful. Now, remind me, didn't we hear repeatedly, time and time again, from the pro-Palestinian groups, as well as in the media, as well as from politicians in the halls of Westminster, about Gaza being an open-air prison?
Exactly.
But 1 year on, after Hamas has been all but destroyed in Gaza, we hear, well, life was beautiful. Look what Israel's done.
I know. This is the whole thing. Israel cannot win. Like you said, before October 7th, Gaza was an open-air prison. It was hell to live there. We were hearing tons of stories. And even, I remember seeing something when there was all the protests at the border, and Channel 4 basically were putting out images of the contrast between Israel and Gaza. And they literally had donkeys pulling an old scrap car along in Gaza. And then they had Israel with an F-35 jet that was there. They were trying to compare the two. Hamas is fighting with sticks and stones, whereas Israel's got these sort of things. They're trying to show the contrast of life, this and the other. And actually, if you see any of the videos before the October 7th massacre, before the war broke out, Gaza actually had a lot of, I wouldn't say everyone in Gaza had luxury, but Hamas definitely had luxury.
Definitely.
They had 5-star hotels, they had malls, they had, restaurants, swimming pools, bars, beaches, you name it, they had it. There was a luxury, we've spoken about this on the podcast before, where maybe about 6 months before the war broke out, there was actually a new Lamborghini or sort of, luxury car dealership that opened up. And it was 3 stories high, the sort of thing you would see driving into London when you see the Mercedes building, that kind of thing. But it was Lamborghinis, things like that. And one of the bloggers was there filming, and he said, "We can't show the world this because they won't give us any more money." He was joking. Even he knew it was absurd, the amount of wealth sort of thing. But you're right. Now the media's twisting it and spinning it, saying, "Wow, Gaza was so beautiful, and now look what Israel's done." Yes. Before it was, Gaza is so impoverished because look what Israel's doing.
Yes.
And it's
Israel is always to blame,
always
according
the bad
to
guy.
their narrative.
Yeah.
Always the bad guy. Never the victim.
Yeah.
Always the stronger and against the weaker. It's the whole David Goliath mentality.
They flipped
reversed it. And so I thought that was interesting. And I think that's something, as you say, it has emerged now 1 year on after October the 7th. That's something that doesn't make sense. Do you have any things which don't make sense, Alex?
I have quite a lot of things that don't make sense. One of them here is how Israel is not allowed to suffer trauma or be a victim, like you just literally said. The Guardian put out this on October 7th. They said how Israel has made trauma a weapon of war. It says, a year later, memorials to the 7th of October attacks are art, virtual reality, and dark tourism to stir support for limitless violence. But there is different ways to remember. So basically they're saying October 7th, remembering innocent men, women, and children being killed is just an excuse to kill Palestinians. That's basically what the Guardian was saying. This was an article by Naomi Klein. Actually, sorry, it was on Sunday the 5th of October, that one. And I think another, just to add to this, The Independent, they put out a front page, which was 365 days of horror since October 7th, and hidden in the numbers they've got, because they've got all the different numbers of the alleged numbers killed in the Palestinian territories, the alleged numbers of wounded, all this stuff, and hidden in there they've got 1,205 victims of Israel, and then the 251 hostages. But it's like very small compared to the big numbers of other ones they've got there. And I think it's the same thing of, it's like the media, certain parts of the media anyway, will not let Israel have 1 day of mourning. And it's also, I mean, the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem actually said this at the CUFI event in Washington. When she was contacted, she actually said from the stage, she thought that Israel would have 1 week of grace before the media turned. And actually, she said after 2 days, that was it. There was no more grace, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And, even we even heard it, even before Israel struck, they were being accused of genocide. Even this week, I saw on Twitter a very prominent Islamic influencer. He was saying that Hamas did not commit the atrocities of October 7th. He was saying it was Israeli Apaches, Israeli soldiers who went there and massacred their own people in order to have an excuse to commit a genocide.
Yes.
And it's just absolute garbage, nonsense.
No.
There is ample evidence of it. But again, it's the denying, it's like Holocaust denial, but now, October 7th denial. And,
that's a good point. Yeah, that is a good point. I have another one.
Yep.
Another thing that doesn't make sense, and that is why, despite Hezbollah being banned in the UK, some people think that it is still acceptable to go onto the streets of London holding up banners saying Hezbollah is not a terror, are not terrorists.
Yeah.
This is what happened on Saturday. There was a large pro-Palestinian protest. Interestingly, I heard one news channel say that there were 2 protests in London on Saturday, one being a quote, stop the war, pro-Palestinian group, and then the other one being a stop the hate. Well, no, there were not 2 protests. There was 1 protest and there was a counter-protest.
Yeah.
That's the truth. But anyway, there were a number of arrests for various reasons among the pro-Palestinian protesters. 2 arrests were made regarding the placards relating to Hezbollah. And let's just reiterate, Hezbollah is a terrorist group. Of course it is. And it is banned in the UK. And let us hope it's a good sign that some arrests were made. But if there more need to be made, then let's hope that justice is executed and that the police are strong on these offences.
Yep.
It is absolutely unacceptable. And you've noticed that that these have become much more prominent. This has become much more prominent in the protests.
Yeah. That
now, because Israel is fighting a war against Hezbollah, suddenly, it's not just Hamas on the placards, it's Hezbollah. Basically, for these, and I'm trying to say something nice about them, but like for these protesters on the streets, are basically choosing whatever side is an enemy of Israel. That's it. It doesn't matter who comes up now, who steps up. They will be flying their flag.
Yeah, it was the Houthis before. We stand with Yemen. I think they're saying, even though Yemen isn't the Houthis.
Yes.
It's the same with Lebanon and Hezbollah.
Yes.
Hezbollah is not Lebanon. Even though they're based there.
Yeah. And there's Lebanon flags. That's the sad thing.
Yeah.
There's Lebanon flags in these protests, and Hezbollah is not synonymous with Lebanon.
Yeah, exactly.
Because many Lebanese don't
like Hezbollah.
No.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's something which doesn't make sense. But one of the things which I think is perpetuating this problem is going back actually to the media or many in the media, because I was listening to a BBC bulletin which referred to Hezbollah, this is a few days ago, as the Hezbollah movement.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? The movement, not the Hezbollah terrorist group.
Yeah.
And actually, if you look carefully at some of their articles online, they're using all sorts of words, but not terrorist.
Yeah.
And so I did a little exercise, by I quite enjoy looking at historic, I know this might sound a little bit dull, but I actually quite enjoy looking at historic news articles prior to certain events, like World War II, for example. It's very interesting. If you read news articles in the 30s, you'll read articles dismissing the threat of Nazism. You'll see articles warning, Winston Churchill, and that warning of the threat of war in Europe and of the threat of Nazism way before it was on anyone's radar.
Yeah.
And so I find that quite interesting. So I decided to have a look at past BBC articles and how they sort of portrayed Hezbollah in the past. And there is this article going back to 2011, and I just want to pull it up because it's quite interesting. It's an article written by the BBC saying Hezbollah, terrorist organization or liberation movement.
Mm-hmm.
And they quote various people such as Alastair Crook. It sounds a lot like Alastair Kirk, but it's not me.
Right.
Okay, it's Alastair Crook. He was, and this is quite a worrying sign, he is a former British intelligence agent. He now runs a think tank in Beirut, or this is in 2011 he did, and he has frequent contact with Hezbollah. He says they are a resistance movement. He says they are a liberation movement. That's a former British intelligence agent. Anyway, and this is a quote from their article, and I thought this was very interesting. Hezbollah, this is the BBC saying, Hezbollah admits that it was responsible for starting the 2006 war. It captured 2 Israeli soldiers, hoping to swap them for some Lebanese prisoners held in Israel. Now, does that sound familiar?
Exactly.
They basically started the war by capturing Israeli soldiers. Hassan Nasrallah has said, do you remember him? That he was surprised when Israel responded to the provocation by launching a major offensive. Now, you could literally transpose that into the current time.
I know.
Kidnappings, of course, on a much larger scale than even in 2006, and the surprise that Israel has decided to take action. And it continues, it is an illustration of how war on southern Lebanon can flare up without warning, and many believe it could happen again in the coming years. Predicting this next war is a difficult business, says Nicholas No, who has compiled the collected speeches. He says, Nasrallah actually promised a few years ago that we will see the end of Israel within the next few years. With those promises, it makes it even more dangerous. Now, and I could go on. But anyway, I just thought it's quite interesting when you go back in time and you see all of this narrative. And of course, here we are now in 2024. Nasrallah is dead.
Yep.
His plan to wipe out Israel in the next few years is over, and it's not going to succeed.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, we've heard in the past few days that not only has Nasrallah's replacement been killed by Israel, but his replacement has been killed by Israel.
Yeah. And Hezbollah were probably surprised by the response again after they fired 9,000 rockets into Israel. Oh no, they've now started to attack us.
Over the past year.
And the same with Hamas. I remember actually early on in the war with Hamas, that Hamas, there was a report on Al Jazeera where it said Hamas were surprised by the response of Israel. It's like, what did you expect? You go in and you murder innocent people, and you think Israel's not going to respond. And I think it is just that it's just weird. I'm not sure if that was just propaganda putting out there to try and make it look like Israel's responded too harshly or something, or if the Hamas terrorists really were surprised.
Yes.
Hang on a second, what have we unleashed here?
Yes.
But I do think it's kind of that thing in the Bible where it says there's nothing new under the sun, nothing at all. It's like ultimately we just see it, and that goes back thousands of years. The hatred of the Jewish people. They are victims of someone trying to take them out. The Jewish people fight back and win. That literally happens, and Israel has done that throughout its long history and its more recent history as well.
So anyway, the BBC has toiled with this debate of whether or not Hezbollah is a terrorist group or a movement, and even now,
I know when they're outlawed in the UK,
they just can't say it.
I know
they can't come to say it.
Yeah. And I think, going back to the things that don't make sense thing, I think actually it makes sense when you look at it from the propaganda being put out by the BBC. It does make sense that there are pro-Hamas and pro-Hezbollah supporters on the streets of London. And I think the other thing as well, going something else that doesn't make sense, why are they putting out this propaganda? Because the other day we were talking about it with Khamenei. He put out his speech.
Yeah, the Iranian Supreme Leader.
Yeah, the Iranian Supreme Leader. We're obviously trying to get the IRGC banned in the UK because we believe the IRGC is a terrorist organization. But Iran literally controls Hezbollah. They are a terrorist organization. He is inciting terror, which is a criminal offence in the UK. And yet the BBC, instead of having their reporting, which they are supposedly meant to do, where they have two sides and they try and report on it equally, instead they let him have his speech up for an hour, and there were headlines flashing on the thing saying Khamenei says, October 7th was legal and justified, and that sort of message.
And for an hour. His speech was an hour, and the BBC ran the entire speech live on their news channel. That doesn't make sense to me. It does not make sense. No. And yet there are other political leaders, legitimate political leaders, whose speeches get cut short by the BBC.
I know.
One of those is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whose full speech at the UN wasn't even covered in its entirety, and yet the leader of Iran is. That does not make sense.
Yep. So I'll just say a quick fire few things that don't make sense. So there's one story from last week, which was that the IDF rescued a Yazidi girl who was held as a sex slave in Gaza. So she was kidnapped by ISIS,
right?
A Yazidi from not from Gaza, right? Kidnapped by ISIS, taken into Gaza, smuggled in somehow, and then she was rescued by the IDF. And I just thought, that's something that doesn't make sense. How is it that Hamas and ISIS are working together to kidnap Yazidis and, hold them hostage? And yet Israel is seen as the bad guy, even though they are rescuing victims of terror.
Yeah. And that makes sense.
That makes sense. Israel makes sense. But
but Israel has a heart.
Yeah, but Hamas and ISIS working together doesn't make sense. Well, actually, it does.
But actually, it does make sense.
When you
Shall we rename this segment "Things That Do Make Sense"?
Yeah.
I mean, let's just
things that shouldn't make sense.
Shouldn't make sense that do. Anyway, we'll stick with the plan. Anyway, carry on.
Another one here where there was someone who stood outside of Auschwitz last week and held up a sign. He had a Palestinian flag on him, and he held up a sign saying, "Israel created the largest death camp in history." And on the other side, it says, "Israel is doing to the Palestinians what Germany did to the Jews." Now, that doesn't make sense in any way, shape, or form, because, that's absolutely disgusting and grotesque. That someone, first of all, would protest outside of Auschwitz.
Yes.
But also to accuse Israel of doing what the Germans or the Nazis did to the Jews is completely anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense anyway, because, first of all, Gaza is not the largest concentration camp on earth. Israel is not doing what the Nazis did. The Nazis literally killed 6 million men, women, and children simply because they were Jewish.
Yes.
And now another thing that doesn't make sense, the anti-Semitic smear or lie that Israel is committing genocide. It's been reported this week that around 80% of the Palestinians who have been killed in the Israel-Hamas conflict are either Hamas or members of Hamas family members.
Right.
Family members of Hamas members. And so that shows that there is one of the lowest civilian to combatant death ratios on earth, and yet it is the only war in the last 20 or 30 years that is being accused of genocide. That doesn't make sense to me, and it doesn't make sense that this buffoon is stood there at Auschwitz. I hope he's got arrested. I don't really know what happened to him, but it doesn't make sense if he isn't arrested, because that is anti-Semitic and that is illegal.
Yeah, it is. And on that note, we probably need to draw this podcast to a close, except to say that whilst these things might not make sense on paper, they do make sense in light of the fact that we know that we are in a battle for truth. We know that we are in a fight between light and darkness, between good and evil.
Yep.
And actually, when we try and find out what the truth is, these things, the light is shed on them, things do make sense.
Yep.
The Bible is the foundation for our support for Israel as Christians. And once you get that foundation in place and you get that foundation right, then actually all these other things you can then begin to see fall into place as to why you should stand with Israel and the Jewish people. So we're very much committed here at CUFI to speak up against these things which simply do not make sense, and to be a voice for truth, hopefully a voice of reason. And we want to thank you for all of your help in helping CUFI to do that. We recognize that we're not alone, actually. We have you, our supporters, that are praying for this ministry, standing with us, participating in our campaigns, being a voice in your own community and your own family, and being an example, because I think that is what we need in this time. It's not just about what you say, it's about what you do.
Yep.
And we want to really be, to put our words into action. So let us all think about what that might mean in our own context, in our own world. What does that mean? How can we stand with Israel and the Jewish people in a deeper way, in an effective way that is going to have a lasting impact? Thank you for being part of Christians United for Israel. If you would like to help this work go even further, then please do consider becoming a member of CUFI by making a regular donation, a monthly donation. Of course, you could also make a one-off donation. We are grateful for any and all support to the work of CUFI. And to do that, please go to www.cufi.org.uk/donate. And please remember that actually liking and sharing this podcast also helps get the message go even further. So please do that. Please like, share with your friends, hit the subscribe button. And until next time, let's continue to not be silent for Zion's sake, but to continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Until next time, may the Lord be with you and bless you. Bye-bye.